August 1986. First Bank, Sabongidora, Bendel State, Nigeria, midday. The kind of heat that bends the air and makes you want to stay inside. The bank is open, customers at the counter, tellers counting notes. A routine day. Then the doors burst open. Armed men flood in. Weapons raised, screaming fills the air. In minutes they clean out the cash, but before they leave, gunshots ring out. A police officer is dead. Several others are wounded. The robbers vanish into the afternoon heat as if they were never there. Just a few thousand naira. But the message left behind was worth far more than money. It was a declaration of war. The man behind it called himself the law. And for the next 4 months, all of Nigeria would come to understand exactly why. In today's episode of The Dons, we uncover the complete story of Lawrence Nomanyagbon Anini, Nigeria's most notorious armed robber, the man who terrorized an entire state, humiliated a military government, killed 11 police officers, murdered 9 civilians, wrote letters to newspapers taunting the president, and made an entire nation ask one question: will they ever catch him? Lawrence Nomanyagbon Anini was born sometime in 1960 in Oragho village, Oyemwosa local government area, a rural settlement located roughly 100 kilometers from Benin City in what was then known as Bendel State, now present-day Edo State, Nigeria. He was the second child and the only son of his mother, Madam Akugihia Oghadamwe, who raised him alongside 2 sisters. His father, who would later die in 1980, had a son with another woman, a detail that only became known to the family years later. From the beginning, Anini's world was a world of limited options. Oragho was a quiet, rural community far from the lights and opportunities of the city. There were no big careers being built there, no connections, no shortcuts, just the slow, grinding life of a small Nigerian village. But Anini had drive, he had ambition. At a young age, he left Oragho and made his way to Benin City, the capital of Bendel State, the historic seat of the Benin Kingdom, one of Africa's most celebrated ancient empires. And his dream when he arrived was simple. He wanted to be a driver. He learned the roads of Benin City. He learned how to handle a vehicle. He became a taxi driver, and he became a good one. Very good. He was young, he was sharp, and within a short time he had made himself known in the motor parks of Benin City as someone special. Not just as a driver, but as a personality. He had a presence, a command. When disputes broke out between the touts and operators at the parks, people came to Anini. He settled things. He kept order. Because of this, people in the parks and surrounding communities began calling him by a nickname. They called him the Law. He liked that name. He would carry it for the rest of his life. But Benin City's motor parks in the early 1980s were not just places where drivers waited for passengers. They were intersections of a darker world. Gangs operated in and around the parks. Criminal godfathers used drivers and touts as muscle, as lookouts, as transport. And Anini, with his skill behind the wheel and his reputation as someone who could handle pressure, became attractive to these elements. He began driving for criminal gangs, ferrying them to and from operations. It started as a job. It became a calling. He was not just driving criminals. He was learning from them, learning the routes, learning the tactics, learning which targets to hit and which ones to leave alone, learning how to move fast, how to disappear, how to not leave witnesses. By the early 1980s, Anini had decided he was done working for other people's gangs. He would build his own. He recruited carefully. His crew included Monday Asenber, who would become his most trusted second-in-command. Alongside Asenber, he brought in Solomon Osmunki, Johnbul Ahuwen, Moses Idahosa, Philip Iwebelua, Bernard Obi, and Friday Ukpanwen. He also reportedly added others over time, including men known in criminal circles as Friday Oaf, Smalley, and Henry Ekpanwen. This was not a disorganized street gang. This was a crew built around Anini's specific skills: speed, knowledge of the roads, discipline under pressure, violence as a tool, not an emotion. They started small: car hijackings, bus robberies, snatching vehicles from their owners in broad daylight, stripping them or reselling them. But Anini had bigger ambitions. He turned the gang toward banks. Armed bank robbery in Nigeria in the 1980s was a serious crime that carried the death penalty. That did not stop him. In fact, it seemed to push him further. There was one critical element that made the Anini gang different from any other criminal outfit operating in Benin State at that time. One element that explained how they could operate so freely, hit targets so precisely, vanish so cleanly, and evade capture for so long. That element had a name: Deputy Superintendent of Police George Iyamu. DSP George Iyamu was a senior officer in the Nigeria police force stationed in Benin State. He was one of the people whose job it was to stop exactly the kind of crime Anini was committing. But Iyamu had made a different choice. He had made himself available to Anini. He became what the gang affectionately called Baba, a father figure inside the system who protected them from within. According to Anini's own confessions after his arrest, Iyamu gave the gang police intelligence. He told them when raids were coming. He told them which officers were investigating them. He gave them logistical support, including arms and ammunition. He helped plan operations, feeding the gang information about bank security arrangements and police patrol routes. And after each successful robbery, Iyamu took his cut of the loot. According to investigators and reporters who later pieced together the story, Iyamu used his share of the blood money to acquire multiple choice properties in Benin City, exotic vehicles, and a lifestyle of wealth that was impossible to explain on a police salary. This was the hidden engine behind the Anini machine, a corrupt cop inside the system, feeding information to killers in exchange for money. It would take years before the full weight of that betrayal was made public. By 1985, the police were aware that Anini and his gang existed and were operating in Benin State. But awareness was not the same as action. In 1985, the police raided Anini's home village of Oragho, arresting several villagers including his younger sister. His mother, Madam Akugihia, was also detained and later released. She would later tell This Week magazine in 1987 that she and her family members were subjected to all forms of torture during their time in police custody. The raids achieved nothing. Anini was not there, and the intelligence to find him was not available outside the police force because the intelligence was being fed in the wrong direction, from Iyamu to Anini. Then came the event that many believe pushed Anini from a criminal into something far more dangerous. In early 1986, 2 members of the Anini gang were arrested, tried, and prosecuted. On the surface, this was a police success. But according to multiple sources, there had been an agreement between the gang and certain corrupt officers that evidence against gang members would be suppressed and charges would quietly disappear. When that agreement was broken and 2 of his men were put in court and convicted, Anini was furious. He felt betrayed. And Lawrence Anini's response to betrayal was not silence, it was bloodshed. August 1986. The gates came off. The 4-month reign of terror that would make Lawrence Anini Nigeria's most wanted man and a national embarrassment to the military government of General Ibrahim Babangida had begun. August 1986. First Bank Sabangidora, Edo State. This was the robbery that opened the chapter. The gang stormed the bank. Police officer Nathaniel Egherba was shot dead inside the branch. Several others were wounded. The gang escaped with 2,000 naira, a relatively small amount that was beside the point. The point was what they left behind: a dead police officer, and a clear statement that the Anini gang was no longer operating quietly. That same month in August 1986, 2 police officers on duty at a road barricade attempted to stop Anini's vehicle as it passed through. Before they could react, they were shot. Both officers were killed at the barricade. The gang drove away. Still in August 1986, Anini wrote a letter, not to a police officer, not to a government official. He wrote to the manager of the New Nigeria Bank, Ring Road Branch, Benin City. The letter informed the manager that Anini intended to visit the bank soon and that, out of courtesy, the sum of 10,000 naira should be set aside for him. He signed the letter with his address, number 1 million, Anywhere Street within the city Benin, Bendel State. Rather than report this threat to the police, the bank's management went directly to the Oba of Benin, the traditional ruler of the kingdom, to ask for help. They did not trust the police. In Benin City at that point, many people had stopped trusting the police entirely because they feared that any information they gave to officers could find its way back to Anini. September 6, 1986, Benin City. The Anini gang carried out one of their most audacious attacks. They targeted a Peugeot 504 car belonging to the driver of Assistant Inspector General of Police Christopher Omben, one of the most senior law enforcement officers in the country. The driver's name was Albert Otto. The gang intercepted the vehicle, dragged Otto out and shot him dead. They hid his body. It would not be found until 3 months later, in December of 1986, when a skeleton was discovered 16 kilometers outside Benin City along the Benin-Agbar Highway. DSP Iyamu, who was actively working with the gang, had reportedly been part of a plan to kill Omben himself. The plan to kill the AIG failed, but killing his driver and stealing his official vehicle sent a message that no one in Nigeria's security establishment could ignore. If they could target the car of an assistant inspector general, no one was safe. A day after this attack, September 7th, Anini was driving a Passat car believed to have been stolen and carried out the hijacking of another Peugeot 504 near the former FEDECO office in Benin City. 2 days after that, September 9th, Anini's men struck again in Oyemwosa local government area of Bendel State. 2 police officers were killed. Still in September 1986, 3 more robbery attacks were carried out, all linked to Anini. In one operation, Frank Onarumi, a former staff writer with the Nigerian Observer newspaper, was murdered. In another, Mrs. Remi Sobanjo, a chartered accountant and the president of the Ugbowo Lioness Club, was killed. In a third, the gang intercepted and robbed the royal vehicle of the Ovi of Ugheli, the Ugheli monarch, a traditional ruler traveling in his gleaming Mercedes-Benz. The king, fully dressed in his royal regalia, was dragged from his car in the street. His vehicle was taken. He was forced to find a hired taxi back to his palace. It was a deliberate act of humiliation directed at one of the most respected figures in the region. Before September closed out, Anini struck a petrol station along Wire Road in Benin City. He stole a substantial portion of the day's sales, shot the station attendant, and then, in a display that would fuel his Robin Hood myth, began spraying wads of Naira notes along the road as he drove away. People scrambled to pick them up. This was not generosity. This was theater. Anini was building a public image. He was telling ordinary Nigerians that the money belonged to the corrupt system, not to the people, and he was the one returning it. October 1st, 1986, Nigeria's Independence Day, the date the country celebrated its freedom from colonial rule, flags flying, radio broadcasts, military parades, and in Benin City, Lawrence Anini chose this day above all days to strike. The target was Commissioner of Police Casimir Igbokwe, the highest-ranking police officer in Bendel State. Anini, using intelligence from DSP Iyamu, had obtained the commissioner's convoy route. The gang lay in wait. When the commissioner's vehicles came through, Anini and his men opened fire. The convoy was torn apart in a hail of bullets. Commissioner Igbokwe was hit. He was wounded seriously, shot multiple times. He survived, but only barely. He was later flown to London for surgery to repair the damage done to his face. According to Monday Asamber's own statement reported in New Nigerian on December 7, 1986, Asamber claimed that the gang had not known the commissioner was in the vehicle. He said they believed they were targeting CID detectives who had been coming to their houses to collect money. Whether that explanation was true or a convenient lie, the result was the same. The commissioner of police for an entire Nigerian state had been ambushed and shot on Nigeria's Independence Day by a gang of armed robbers. The political shockwaves were enormous. The fallout was immediate and went all the way to the top. At a meeting of the Armed Forces Ruling Council, the nation's highest decision-making body, in October 1986, military President General Ibrahim Babangida, the head of state of the entire country, turned to Inspector General of Police Iyamu and spoke words that instantly became infamous across Nigeria. He looked at the IGP and said, "My friend, where is Anini?" The message was clear. The military government was humiliated. The army, the police, the entire security establishment of a nation of over 100 million people could not find one 26-year-old robber from Bendel State. At the same moment, newspaper headlines across the country amplified the shame. The Guardian Nigeria ran the headline, "Will they ever find Anini, the law?" Editorials with titles like The Anini Challenge, The Anini Saga, The Anini Factor, Lawrence Anini, The Man, the Myth, Anini, Jack the Ripper and Lawrence Anini, a Robin Hood in Bendel filled every major publication in the country. A saying spread through the nation that of the 19 states in Nigeria at the time, Anini effectively controlled 3 of them, Ondo, Anambra, and Bendel. Even the BBC reportedly taunted Babangida, noting that, as the military president, he controlled 17 states, while criminals controlled Lagos and Bendel. Nigeria had never been so publicly embarrassed by a single criminal. October 21, 1986, Agber, Delta Area, Bendel State. The Anini gang raided the Agber branch of African Continental Bank and stole 46,000 naira. After the robbery, Anini drove his getaway car into a nearby market, slowed down and began throwing bundles of cash out of the window to market traders and ordinary people standing by the road. People ran after the notes, cheering, laughing, picking up money from the ground. That image, a bandit scattering stolen cash to the poor, cemented the Robin Hood narrative that Anini was carefully constructing in the minds of the public. He also wrote to the head of state directly that same month. The letter, quoted in Newswatch magazine on October 27, 1986, read, "Tell our president we like him but we are not happy here in Bendel. The payment for everything is too much. That is why I now divide any money I get to the people." He attached a list of 6 demands as conditions for peace to return to Benin City. He demanded no more prosecution of innocent armed robbers, a stop to the collusion between police and the Nigerian Union of Road Transport Workers and members of the Ogboni cult, no more harassment of market women returning from work, an end to illegal collections by highway patrol officers, equal treatment for all citizens, and fair treatment for legitimate drivers by police. The letter read like a political manifesto. Anini had positioned himself not just as a robber, but as a spokesperson for the poor, for transport workers, for market women, for people he believed were being squeezed by a corrupt system. It was propaganda, but it was effective propaganda. In the same month of October 1986, Anini also sent threats to a Benin City doctor, informing him that he would soon receive a visit. The doctor, Dr. Oyemwosa, took no chances. He left Benin temporarily. According to multiple reports, he died on the road while attempting to get away in an unrelated accident near the Benin textile factory. Even in flight from Anini, people were losing their lives. By late 1986, Babangida had had enough. He ordered a full-scale, coordinated national manhunt involving police, army, and Air Force units combing every part of Bendel State. Operation after operation was launched. Checkpoints were set up across the state. Communities were searched. Informants were pressured. And Anini continued to operate. Every time the net seemed to tighten, he slipped through. Local communities began spreading stories that he was untouchable, that he had powerful spiritual charms protecting him. Those who knew him described him as a man who wore assorted charms around his waist during operations, a man who consulted spiritual protection before every major robbery. For ordinary Nigerians watching from a distance, the inability of the entire state security apparatus to catch one man only confirmed those whispers. The law had become a myth. What authorities also did not fully understand was the degree to which Anini's network extended beyond the gang itself. Many in the communities he operated in kept his secrets, some out of fear, some out of genuine loyalty, some because they had received his money and felt some gratitude, and some because they had no faith that talking to the police would help them, and every reason to believe it could get them killed. December 3, 1986. Number 26, Oyemwosa Street, Benin City, opposite Iguodala Primary School. The tip came from inside. A source close to Anini, later reported in some accounts to have been a girlfriend, gave away his location. Superintendent of Police Kayode Amanararo, who led the elite 10-man special squad known as Mopal 5, moved on the information quickly and quietly. No big convoy, no announcements, just a precise team moving on a precise location at the right moment. Anini was inside the house in the company of women, enjoying himself, relaxed. When the police knocked on the door, Anini himself opened it. When asked where Anini was, he tried to play his way out. "Oh, Anini is in the inner room under the bed," he told them, and began to walk past the officers toward the exit. Amanararo reached for his weapon. He fired at Anini's left ankle, stopping him. As Anini struggled, the police opened fire on his leg repeatedly, firing 6 rounds into it. Anini collapsed. He was down. Asked again whether he was Anini, he dropped all pretense. He said, "My brother, I won't deceive you. I won't tell you lie. I'm Anini." Nigeria's most wanted man was in handcuffs. The law had been arrested. A 16-year-old schoolgirl named Florence Akoreji, who happened to be at or near the house at the time of the arrest, was shot in the thigh in the chaos of the operation. She was treated at the same hospital where Anini was later admitted. Anini was taken first to police headquarters, where officers paraded and photographed their prize before eventually getting him to the military hospital. The Guardian Nigeria later condemned this delay, writing in its editorial on December 13, 1986, that the state has the duty to protect even a notoriously bad man, and that the force used against Anini was patently brutal and unreasonable. The injuries to his leg were so severe that doctors had no choice but to amputate. Lawrence Anini, the man who had terrorized all of Bendel State for 4 months, left hospital with one leg. The cover of This Week magazine blared the headline, "Anini, face to face with the law." Nigeria exhaled. The confessions began almost immediately. In the hospital, in the interrogation rooms. Once stripped of his charms, once his leg was gone and the aura of invincibility shattered, the fearless outlaw disappeared. In his place was a man in pain, remorseful, and willing to talk. What came out of those confessions shook the country in a way that even the robberies had not fully managed. Anini named names. He did not just name fellow robbers. He pointed directly at the police. He told investigators that DSP George Iyamu had been the gang's inside man, that Iyamu had fed them police intelligence before every major operation, that Iyamu had supplied them with weapons and ammunition, that Iyamu had planned operations alongside them, including the plot to kill Assistant Inspector General Christopher Omben, that Iyamu, after each successful robbery, would sit down with the gang and take his share of the money. The gang called him Baba. Iyamu had used his cut to build properties in Benin City and live a life of luxury that no police salary could explain. Of the 10 police officers Anini implicated during his testimony, 5 were ultimately convicted. George Iyamu was among them. He was tried alongside Anini, alongside Monday Asunbur and the other gang members. Throughout the trial, Iyamu denied everything, insisting he had never worked with Anini, never met with the gang, never taken their money. When Anini was placed on the stand to testify directly against him, the court watched as Anini, sitting in a wheelchair because of his amputated leg, fixed his eyes on the man in the clean police uniform sitting across the room. And in front of the judge, in front of the courtroom, Anini pointed at Iyamu and called him out. Iyamu jumped to his feet and denied it furiously. Anini's response, delivered in the pidgin English that was his only language, cut through the room like a blade. He called Iyamu a shameless liar, a liar without shame. The court believed Anini over the decorated police officer. The trial was presided over by Justice James Oyemwosa, chairman of the First Benin Robbery and Firearms Tribunal. He ran a 33-page judgment that took 80 minutes to deliver. When it was done, everyone in the courtroom knew the outcome before it was officially announced. Justice Oyemwosa sentenced the defendants to death, and in the final words of that judgment, he delivered the most famous line ever spoken about Lawrence Anini. He looked at the man in the wheelchair and said, "Anini will forever be remembered in the history of crime in this country, but it would be of unblessed memory. Few people, if ever, would give the name to their children." In February of 1987, the sentences were confirmed. DSP George Iyamu and other gang members were executed first. Lawrence Anini and his second-in-command, Monday Asanber, were to follow on March 29, 1987. March 29, 1987, Benin City. Dawn had barely broken when the crowds began gathering. By the time the military trucks arrived at the execution ground, thousands upon thousands of people had come from across Benin State to witness what was about to happen. The Associated Press reported that people from all walks of life in Benin State gathered that morning. It was not a celebration in any joyful sense. It was something else. Relief. Catharsis. A shared exhale after years of fear. Lawrence Anini was among those brought out. He was 26 years old. He had been born in a quiet village 100 kilometers from the city where he would die. He had come to Benin City with a dream of becoming a driver. He had become the law. He had killed 20 people in 4 months. He had shot a state police commissioner on Independence Day. He had ambushed and killed officers at roadblocks. He had robbed banks, hijacked royal vehicles, murdered journalists, murdered accountants, stolen from petrol stations, and thrown the money to strangers in the street. He had embarrassed a military president in front of his entire cabinet. He had made the national police force the subject of international ridicule. He had given addresses like number 1 million, anywhere street within the city in letters to bank managers. He had written to the head of state as though they were equals in a negotiation. And now he stood at the end of it all, having lost a leg, having watched his gang be destroyed, having watched a corrupt policeman who called himself Baba be convicted because of his own words. Moments before the firing squad was ordered to fire, Lawrence Anini spoke. The Associated Press reported that he accepted responsibility for all the atrocities he had committed against society and asked the Lord to forgive him. The man who had never admitted fault for anything, who had told reporters that his problem with police was personal, and that he begged his men not to kill people, the man who blamed the system for everything, finally said the words. He asked for forgiveness. Then the shots came. Lawrence Nomanyagbon Anini, alias the Law, alias of Bigbo, alias the Governor, was dead at 26 years old. Monday Asanber died beside him. What Anini left behind was not simple. It was not clean. His crimes killed 20 people, 11 of them police officers and 9 of them civilians. It terrorized an entire state for years. It drove families from their homes. It silenced communities, forced people to look the other way, and made residents of Benin City afraid to report anything to the police because they did not know which officer might be working for the gang. The Oragho community where he was born carried the stigma for years. His mother, who had been detained and tortured by police looking for her son, spoke to the press after his death. His children, Asaro and Imadiabog, born to his wife Hugo, grew up in the shadow of his name. Decades later, in interviews with journalists, they described still being pointed out in the streets of Benin City as the children of Lawrence Anini. He also left behind questions that Nigeria has never fully answered, because Anini did not invent the corruption that fed him. He found it already in place and he used it. DSP George Iyamu did not become corrupt because of Anini. He was already corrupt. He had already built a system where criminal gangs paid police officers for protection and information. Anini simply found that system and used it more loudly, more violently, and more publicly than anyone had before. Professor Angulu Onwujiagwu, writing in Newswatch magazine in October of 1986 while Anini was still at large, described the gang leader as a symbol of Nigeria's moral decay, specifically what he called the pyramidal corruption of the Nigeria police force. He wrote that a time comes when the whole mechanism of law and order gives way, and that in a situation like the one in Benin, the police and criminals have some understanding. That understanding, that quiet agreement between power and crime, was the soil in which Lawrence Anini grew. The Nigerian government responded to the Anini saga by moving to reform policing structures in Bendel State and strengthening anti-corruption measures within law enforcement. The scandal of Iyamu's involvement forced security agencies to look internally in ways they had previously resisted. The lesson, however, was not learned once and for all. As one Nigerian newspaper columnist wrote years later, the DNA of crime in Nigeria mutated after Anini. The forms changed, but the underlying corruption that enabled him, the inside man, the bribed official, the officer on a criminal's payroll, continued to appear in different cases across different decades. In 2019, a remarkably similar scandal emerged when a military captain was accused of shielding a kidnapping kingpin in a case that commentators immediately compared to Anini and Iyamu. Different names, different decade, same betrayal. The 1986 Nollywood film Anini, directed by Fred Amata, dramatized his life for a new generation. YouTube documentaries like The Rise and Fall of Lawrence Anini, released in 2025, continue to draw significant viewership, proving that nearly 4 decades after his death, the name Anini still carries weight in the Nigerian consciousness. Books like The Rise and Fall of Anini by Charles Inanchang and Anini, The Saga of an Armed Robber by Godwin Edikibubu documented the details of his reign for posterity. Academic journals like the Journal of Modern African Studies published peer-reviewed analysis of the Anini saga as early as June of 1987, placing his story in the context of poverty, policing, and political failure in post-colonial Nigeria. Anini himself offered a glimpse into what drove him in a quote that has stayed in the record. Speaking to journalists in Pidgin English, the only language he truly commanded, he said, "I did not kill police. My own is to do my own. I am a driver. I drive. I always beg them not to kill policemen, not to kill people. My problem with the police is that them kill my father and my brother at Ibadan and my friend Kingsley Ueka." Whether this was entirely true or partly a story he told himself, it reveals something. Anini saw himself as a man responding to a system that had wronged him first. That did not make his crimes any less real or any less destructive. It did not bring back the 11 police officers killed. It did not restore Mrs. Remi Sobanjo to her family, or Frank Onorumi to his, or Nathaniel Egherba, the officer shot dead in Sabangidora on that August morning that started it all. It did not give Albert Otto's family closure about the husband and father whose skeleton was found on a highway 16 kilometers from the city where he was murdered. Nothing that Anini believed or said about himself changes what happened to those people. But it does tell us something important about how monsters are made. They are rarely born. They are shaped by poverty, by corruption, by a system that is already broken before the young man from the village arrives in the city with nothing but ambition and a willingness to drive. Those conditions did not excuse Lawrence Anini, but they did create him. And until those conditions change, the next Anini is already somewhere out there, learning the roads, learning the routes, watching which officers take money and which ones do not, waiting. Thank you for watching this episode of The Dons. If this documentary helped you understand the complete and true story of Lawrence Nomanyagbon Anini and the reign of terror he unleashed on Bendel State and all of Nigeria in 1986, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another episode. We tell the real stories of crime, power, and justice from Nigeria, Africa, and beyond. In the comments below, tell us what you think. Could the Anini saga have been stopped earlier if there had been no corruption inside the police force? What do you think Nigeria should have done differently to protect the communities of Bendel State? We remember the victims. We say their names. We demand that their stories are not forgotten. Stay informed. Stay sharp. And never stop asking questions. This is the Dons.